The church smelled faintly of lilies and old wood, the kind of scent that clings to your coat long after you leave. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows in fractured colors, splashing across the rows of neatly arranged chairs. A low hum of conversation floated in the air, polite, subdued, the kind of sound people make when they're trying to behave themselves in a place meant for reverence. I had barely stepped inside when I saw my sister, standing near the front pew. Her hair was perfectly curled, her dress a shade too bright for the occasion, her smile tight in a way only I would recognize. She spotted me instantly. Her expression didn't change, but her steps toward me were deliberate, quick. She leaned in close, her perfume sharp, almost metallic. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. No greeting, no hug, not even a nod. Just those 4 clipped words. I blinked, unsure I'd heard her right. "Excuse me?" She glanced around, then put a hand on my arm, guiding me toward the side aisle with a smile plastered on her face for the benefit of the watching guests. "This isn't your place anymore," she murmured, her voice low enough to be drowned by the organ's slow prelude. It took a second for the words to land. This was Dad's memorial. My father. The man who taught me how to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac when I was 8, who made Saturday morning pancakes shaped like animals, who showed up to every school play even if he had to sit in the back row. And my sister, his other child, was telling me I didn't belong here. I pulled my arm back, my voice sharp but quiet. "What is that supposed to mean?" She didn't answer, just tilted her chin slightly toward the front of the church, where Mom stood talking to a man in a navy suit, our family lawyer. In his hand, a thick envelope. My sister gave me a tight smile, like she'd just passed me a code I wasn't smart enough to crack, and walked away. For a moment I just stood there, frozen. I told myself to breathe, to focus on the flowers, the music, anything but the rising heat in my chest. I made my way to the back row and sat down. From here I could see the whole room, the framed photo of Dad on the altar, the arrangement of white roses, the polished oak podium where the eulogies would be read. But my eyes kept drifting to Mom. She wasn't crying. Her makeup was perfect, not a single streak out of place. She held herself like someone hosting a gala, nodding graciously as people offered condolences. I knew that look. I'd seen it at fundraisers, at neighborhood gatherings, anywhere she had an audience. When I was a kid, I thought it was grace. Now I knew better. A flash of memory slipped in, uninvited. Me, 17, holding a scholarship letter in my hand, barely able to contain my excitement. Mom skimming it for 10 seconds before asking if I could lend my sister my car that weekend. That was the thing about Mom. Your big moments were just background noise to her main event. A hand tapped my shoulder. I turned. It was Mr. Lane, Dad's old fishing buddy. His eyes were red, his voice soft. "Your father was proud of you, you know." I managed a smile. "Thank you." But even as he spoke, my gaze caught something in the corner of my vision. Mom and the lawyer had stepped aside into the vestry, the small side room off the altar. The door didn't close all the way. Through the narrow gap, I saw the lawyer slide a document from his briefcase, a crisp, cream-colored packet stamped with bold black letters. Last Will and Testament. My stomach dropped. A few weeks ago, I'd found a copy of Dad's will in an old file box in my apartment. I wasn't snooping. I'd been looking for my birth certificate. But there it was, signed, dated, witnessed. It wasn't complicated. He'd left the house to be split equally between me and my sister. There was even a handwritten note in the margin. Make sure she keeps the garden. She loves the lilacs. So why was there another will? The organ music swelled as people began taking their seats. My sister moved to the front row, sliding in beside Mom. Neither of them looked back at me. I sat there, my pulse thrumming in my ears, every muscle in my body taut. I could have gotten up, walked out, let them have their neatly curated memorial with their polished lies. But I stayed. The minister began speaking, his voice warm and steady. He talked about Dad's generosity, his sense of humor, his dedication to family. I listened, but the words felt like they were coming from underwater. All I could think about was that packet in the lawyer's hand, the way Mom's fingers lingered on it when she took it from him, the way my sister had looked at me like she'd already won something I didn't know I was about to lose. Halfway through the service, during a hymn, I slipped out of my row and walked quietly toward the side of the church. My steps were slow, deliberate, as if moving too fast would shatter the fragile air around me. I stopped at the vestry door. It was ajar again. Inside, Mom was alone, folding the will back into the envelope with a faint smile. She didn't see me. For a moment, I just stood there, my hand on the frame, my breath shallow. This was my father's memorial. This was supposed to be about remembering him, not rewriting the end of his story. But as I watched her tuck that envelope into her bag, I knew something else. If I walked away now, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. So I turned and went back to my seat, my mind already working faster than my heartbeat. I wasn't leaving. And before this day was of, the hymn ended with a long, echoing note that lingered in the rafters before dissolving into the kind of hush you can almost hear breathing. I sat there, hands clasped in my lap, my knuckles pale. I knew that envelope in Mom's purse wasn't just paper. It was the dividing line between truth and whatever fiction she was trying to pass off as Dad's final word. I tried to focus on the service, but my gaze kept snagging on small details that didn't belong. My sister's restless foot tapping against the polished floor. The way Mom's eyes darted toward the vestry door every time someone walked past. The lawyer's subtle lean toward her, like he was waiting for a signal. When the minister invited friends and family to share their memories, a few stood. One talked about fishing trips, another about late-night coffee in Dad's kitchen. My sister went up too, of course. She stood at the podium, her voice smooth and just loud enough to carry. "My father," she began, "believed in family above all else. He taught us that no matter what, we stand together." My jaw tightened. Together? This from the woman who had just told me I didn't belong here. She glanced toward Mom mid-sentence, like checking she was hitting the right notes in a song they'd rehearsed. I could almost see the invisible thread between them, taut, deliberate, unbreakable if you didn't know where to cut. She ended with a soft smile and a tear dabbed delicately with a tissue. Applause followed. I didn't join in. When she sat, Mom leaned over and whispered something to her. They both laughed quietly. It was a laugh that didn't belong in this room, at this time. The minister moved on, reading a short scripture, but my mind was already somewhere else years back, in the house where we grew up. Dad at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, flipping through bills. Mom standing over him, pointing to something with that same measured calm she wore like a uniform. Even as a teenager, I'd understood that money in our family wasn't just currency, it was leverage. And Dad, for all his kindness, didn't like to fight over it. That was Mom's territory. I remembered the day he told me quietly, "I've made sure you're taken care of." I hadn't asked what he meant. I thought I knew. But sitting here now, watching Mom guard that envelope like it held the deed to her soul, I realized I didn't know at all. The choir began another hymn, softer this time. I used it as cover to slip my phone from my bag and open the Notes app. I typed, "Need to talk after service. Urgent. Bring your laptop." I sent it to a friend Eli, who worked in IT, and owed me a favor. If Mom thought I'd just sit here and watch, she didn't know me as well as she thought. I slipped the phone away just as the hymn ended. The minister invited everyone to join the family for a small reception in the fellowship hall after the service. Chairs scraped, coats rustled. People began filing out in slow, polite waves. I stayed seated until the front rows cleared. My sister and Mom were busy accepting condolences, the lawyer hovering close like a shadow. When they turned toward the fellowship hall, I rose and followed at a careful distance. The hall smelled like coffee and sheet cake. A long table ran along one wall, covered with plates of sandwiches, bowls of potato salad, trays of cookies. People moved through in loose clusters, voices soft but warmer than they'd been in the sanctuary. I hung back near the coffee urn, pouring a cup I didn't want. From here, I could see Mom set her purse on a chair beside her, draping her coat over it like camouflage. My sister stayed glued to her side, smiling, nodding, weaving through small talk. I sipped the coffee. Bitter, too hot, but it kept my hands busy. Then Eli slipped in through the side door wearing jeans and a windbreaker, his laptop bag slung over one shoulder. He caught my eye, lifted a brow. I nodded toward the chair with Mom's purse. We didn't need words. He wandered over, struck up a conversation with a couple from the neighborhood, casually positioning himself between them and the purse. I made my move when Mom stepped away to greet someone near the dessert table. My sister followed, her heels clicking sharply on the tile. For maybe 40 seconds, the purse was unattended. I crossed the room, my pulse pounding, lifted the coat. My fingers closed around the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. I didn't open it, not yet. I slid it into my own bag and walked toward the exit, heart hammering like I'd just committed a felony. Eli joined me outside in the crisp autumn air. "You want me to scan it now?" he asked quietly. "Yes, and make copies." We got into my car, parked a block away. He sat up on the passenger seat, the faint whir of his portable scanner filling the silence between us. I kept my eyes on the church in the rearview mirror. Got it, he said finally, sliding the papers back into the envelope. He handed it to me. You're going to want to see this. I opened it, my hands trembling just enough to make the pages rustle. The will inside was dated 3 months ago, long after Dad had been too sick to hold a pen steady. His signature was there, but it looked wrong. The bequest was simple. Everything, house, savings, personal effects, went to my sister. My name wasn't on a single line. Beneath it, 2 witness signatures, neither name familiar. I swallowed hard. My skin felt hot, my breath shallow. Eli glanced over. That's not legal, he said flatly. Not if what you told me about the old will is true. It's not just illegal, I said quietly. It's theft. From my father. From me. The church bells began to chime the hour, pulling my gaze back to the steeple. Inside, people were probably cutting cake, sharing stories, clinking coffee cups. Mom and my sister would be smiling, certain their performance had gone off without a hitch. I closed the envelope and slid it back into my bag. They think I'm going to walk away, I said. Eli raised a brow. And are you? I met his gaze, steady now. Not a chance. I started the engine. I'm going back in. Everyone in that church was going to hear the truth. The church bells faded into the cool November air as I pulled back into the parking lot. Through the fellowship hall's tall windows, I could see silhouettes moving, people laughing softly, plates of cake in hand, the ordinary rhythms of a post-service reception. To anyone else, it looked warm, even comforting. To me, it was the set of a play I'd been written out of. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, feeling the vibration in my chest. Not fear exactly, but something sharper. Resolve, maybe. The envelope was in my bag, resting against my knee like a coiled spring. Inside, the fellowship hall smelled even stronger of coffee and frosting. Voices rose and fell in friendly hums. My sister was near the center of the room, laughing with 2 women I vaguely recognized from Dad's volunteer group. Mom was at the far end, in her element hands clasped with some older gentleman, head tilted just so, the perfect picture of grace under imaginary strain. Neither of them saw me slip in. Eli was still outside with the scanner in his bag, ready to bolt if things went sideways. We'd agreed. If I gave him the signal, he'd leave with the digital copies and the original will I'd found weeks ago. Insurance. I moved toward the refreshment table, keeping my gaze casual, my steps measured. My sister spotted me then, her smile faltering just a fraction. She excused herself from her circle and cut a direct path toward me. "What are you doing here?" she murmured when she reached me, her voice tight enough to keep the words from carrying. "Getting coffee," I said, pouring from the urn without looking up. "You need to leave." I glanced at her, my own smile faint. "Why? Afraid I'll ruin your little speech?" Her lips pressed together, the faintest tremor in her jaw. "This is not the time." "It's the perfect time," I said softly. She blinked, just once, but it was enough to tell me she knew exactly what I'd found. I set my cup down, stepped past her, and made for the small podium near the head of the room. It wasn't a formal stage, just a raised platform used for announcements during potlucks and holiday events. A microphone stood at its center, unattended. I climbed the 2 steps, my heels clicking against the wood. Conversations began to dip. A few heads turned. "Excuse me," I said into the mic, my voice carrying farther than I expected. The feedback whined briefly, then settled. "I'd like to say a few words about my father." The room quieted almost instantly. Mom turned from her conversation, surprise flickering across her face before she smoothed it away. My sister froze halfway to the podium. I took a breath, let my gaze sweep the room. Some of you knew my dad for decades. You knew his laugh, his generosity, his way of showing up when it mattered most. He taught me that family is built on trust, that it's not about appearances, it's about honesty. A murmur ran through the crowd. I continued. Before he passed, my father made arrangements. He wanted to be sure both his daughters were cared for. He put it in writing. I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope. In fact, I have that writing right here. A ripple moved through the room like a gust of wind. Mom took a step forward. "This is not appropriate." I held up a hand, my voice steady. "What's not appropriate is rewriting a man's final wishes when he's no longer here to defend them." Gasps, sharp intakes of breath. My sister's face flushed crimson. "This, I said, holding up the pages, is a will dated just 3 months ago. It leaves everything our family home, his savings, his possessions to one person. My sister. I paused. My name is nowhere on it. Someone in the back muttered, "That can't be right." "You're correct," I said, "because I also have a copy of the will my father signed more than a year ago, when he was of sound mind and strong body. In that will, he leaves the estate equally to both of us. That's the will he told me about himself. That's the will with his real signature, witnessed by people who actually knew him." Mom's voice cut through, sharp but controlled. "You don't understand what you're talking about." I met her gaze, unblinking. "I understand perfectly. I understand that Dad couldn't have signed this new will. His hand was too unsteady to hold a pen by that point. I understand the witnesses listed here aren't family, friends, or even acquaintances. And I understand that you've been working with the family lawyer to make sure this version is the only one anyone sees." A stunned silence fell. The lawyer himself, standing near the corner, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "I'm not here to cause a scene," I said, my voice lower now, steadier. "But I am here to make sure my father's wishes are honored, and I wanted to say it here in front of all of you, because my dad believed in speaking the truth even when it was inconvenient." The quiet stretched. Someone cleared their throat. My sister looked like she wanted to vanish into the floor. Mom's eyes narrowed, her composure cracking just enough for me to see the calculation beneath. Finally, I stepped back from the mic. "Thank you for listening." I turned and walked down from the podium. My legs felt strangely light, like I was moving through water. As I reached the floor, people began murmuring in low tones, some glancing at me with a mix of shock and something else, respect, maybe. Mom caught my arm as I passed. Her grip was firm, nails just shy of digging in. "You've made a mistake," she whispered. I leaned in, keeping my smile for the onlookers. "Number, I've made it impossible for you to erase him." Her fingers tightened, then released. I walked away, toward the double doors leading outside. Eli was waiting by my car, leaning against the driver's side. "So?" he asked. I exhaled, a long, slow release. They know now. He studied my face. "What happens next?" I glanced back at the church, where the murmur of voices still spilled faintly into the crisp air. "Next," I said, "we make sure this doesn't just stop at whispers." I unlocked the car and slid the envelope back into my bag. Whatever came after lawyers, courtrooms, late-night phone calls, it didn't matter. I'd already done the thing I'd promised myself in the pew this morning. I'd spoken for him, and I wasn't done yet. The air outside the church felt sharper now, the kind that makes your lungs sting a little when you take a deep breath. I leaned against the hood of my car, trying to let the adrenaline ebb, but it didn't. It clung to me, buzzing under my skin, like a current I couldn't ground. Through the open doors, I could still hear the low hum of voices. Only now it had a different tone, edges sharpened, whispers moving faster. I knew exactly who they were talking about. It didn't take long. My sister came first, heels clicking hard against the stone walkway. She didn't slow down until she was standing 2 feet away from me, arms crossed. Her expression wasn't shock anymore, it was fury in a tailored dress. "What was that in there?" she demanded. "You heard it," I said calmly. "You've humiliated Mom. You've humiliated me." I tilted my head. "You think the truth is humiliating?" Her eyes flashed. "This is not how you handle family matters." I almost laughed. "Family matters? You tried to cut me out of Dad's life work, out of my own home. That's not a family matter. That's theft with nicer shoes." Her jaw tightened. She glanced toward the doors as if making sure no one was close enough to overhear. "You have no idea what you're starting." "Oh, I do," I said, "and I'm finishing it too." Before she could answer, Mom stepped out, flanked by the family lawyer. Her face was unreadable, perfectly composed, like she was walking onto a stage she knew by heart. "Inside," she said quietly, not a request. I shook my head. "Number out here is fine." Something flickered in her eyes, annoyance, maybe even a hint of unease, but she didn't let it linger. "You've embarrassed this family today." I straightened. "Number, I've stopped you from erasing Dad." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, his gaze moving between us. "Perhaps we should—" "Stay out of this," Mom snapped without looking at him. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low but firm. "You think I don't have the original will?" "I do, and it's already copied, backed up, sent to people who will make sure it doesn't disappear." For the first time all day, Mom's composure slipped. Not much, just the smallest twitch in her jaw, but I saw it. "You always were dramatic," she said. "No," I replied. I've just learned to stop being quiet. My sister shifted her weight, arms tightening across her chest. You're going to regret this. Funny, I said. I thought I'd regret staying silent. A group of guests exited the church, their conversations pausing as they caught sight of us. Mom's smile flicked on like a light switch. We'll discuss this later, she said smoothly, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. I let her walk away with the lawyer and my sister, their heads bent together. I knew exactly what that huddle meant: damage control. Eli came around the corner a moment later, slipping his phone back into his pocket. I got a couple of those whispers on video, he said. Might help later. Good, I said, because this isn't ending here. The next day, my phone lit up before I'd even poured my first cup of coffee. First, my sister's 6 missed calls, then Mom 3 voicemails in a row. I didn't listen. The text came next. You've made this so much worse. We could have handled this privately. Do you realize what you've done to the family's reputation? Reputation. That was always the currency Mom valued most. Not the truth, not fairness, just the glossy surface she showed the world. By mid-morning, I decided to answer. Not a call those can be twisted, misquoted. I sent a single text to both of them. Any further discussion should go through my attorney. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. I didn't pick up. That afternoon, Eli and I met at a coffee shop a few blocks from the courthouse. I slid into the booth across from him, setting my bag beside me. They're scared, he said, stirring his drink. They should be, I replied. He leaned forward. You ready for what's next? It's not going to be polite. I'm past polite, I said. I pulled out the copies of both wills, the forged one and the original, and laid them side by side. Even to an untrained eye, the differences were obvious. The shaky, uneven scrawl on the forged will. The witnesses' names, complete strangers. The dates that didn't align with Dad's medical records. I want this filed, I said. Formally. Eli nodded. Once it's in motion, there's no going back. I don't want to go back. By the time I got home, the sun was low, spilling gold across the hardwood floors. My phone buzzed again this time. A single text from my sister. You've gone too far. I stared at it for a moment, then typed back. Or maybe I've finally gone far enough. I set the phone down, the weight of the last 48 hours settling over me. I knew there would be more lawyers, paperwork, maybe even court. I knew my sister and Mom would fight tooth and nail to keep what they'd tried to take. But I also knew something else. They weren't the only ones who could play the long game. I glanced at the framed photo of Dad on my bookshelf, taken the summer before he got sick. He was smiling, one arm slung around me, the other holding a fishing rod. The lake behind us glimmered in the sun. I've got this, I whispered, and for the first time in years, I believed it. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside a brick building downtown, the November wind cutting through my coat. The sign above the glass door read, Harlan and West, Attorneys at Law. Inside, the air was warm, faintly smelling of old paper and fresh coffee. I hadn't been in a lawyer's office since I closed on my condo 6 years ago. Back then, it was all signatures and handshakes. Today, it felt different. This wasn't a transaction. This was a line in the sand. Mr. Bennett, the probate attorney Eli recommended, had a quiet way about him. Mid-60s, gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of man who looked like he'd rather listen than talk. I laid both wills on his desk. This is the original, I said, tapping the first, and this is what my family tried to replace it with. He studied them in silence, eyes narrowing just slightly as he compared the signatures. Your father's health 3 months before his passing? I slid over a copy of Dad's hospice intake paperwork. Severe tremors, limited mobility. He couldn't even sign his name on a birthday card without help by then. Bennett nodded slowly. And these witnesses? I've never met them. No connection to the family. I checked. He leaned back in his chair. Forgery is a strong word, but given what you've shown me, I'd say you have a compelling case for undue influence, at the very least. What's the next step? I asked. We'll file a petition with the probate court to challenge the will. That means notifying all interested parties, your mother, your sister, the attorney who prepared this newer will. I exhaled. They're going to come after me. They'll try, Bennett said simply. The question is, are you ready for that fight? I met his gaze. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. The first volley came faster than I expected. By that evening, my inbox lit up with an email from my sister's personal account. Subject: Family Matters. Body: You've crossed a line. If you think this will end in your favor, you're mistaken. We'll make sure everyone knows how you've treated this family. You've turned Dad's memorial into a circus. No greeting, no sign-off, just a warning dressed as a lecture. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to Bennett with the note, Exhibit A. The second volley came the next morning, this time from Mom. A voicemail. Her tone was cool, clipped. You have until Friday to withdraw this ridiculous challenge. If you don't, you will regret it. I played it twice. Same message, same cadence. I saved it. Another exhibit. By Thursday, word had started to spread beyond the memorial guests. Old neighbors, Dad's fishing buddies. Even a couple of my high school teachers reached out. Most wanted to know what really happened. Some just offered quiet support. But not everyone was neutral. I ran into Mrs. Conway, the woman who'd lived across the street from my parents for 30 years, in the grocery store. I don't know what you're doing, she said, blocking my cart in the produce aisle, but your mother has been nothing but good to you girls. I kept my voice calm. Mrs. Conway, I loved my father. I'm making sure his wishes are respected. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Sometimes keeping peace is more important than being right. I smiled faintly. Sometimes being right is the only way to have peace. Friday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee, the sky outside still a soft pre-dawn gray. My phone buzzed an email from Bennett. Filed. Just one word, but it landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through my chest. The challenge was official now. No more warnings. No more whispered threats. The clock was ticking toward a courtroom. At 10:15 a.m., my sister called. Against my better judgment, I picked up. So it's true, she said, no hello. It's true, I replied. You're dragging our family name through the mud. I laughed once, short and sharp. I'm dragging the truth into daylight. There's a difference. You think Dad would want this? Yes, I said simply. I think he'd want his real wishes honored, and I think he'd be ashamed of what you and Mom tried to do. Silence. Then a click. She'd hung up. That afternoon, Eli stopped by with his laptop. You're going to want to see this, he said, dropping into a chair. On his screen was security footage grainy, but clear enough. Date stamped 6 weeks before Dad passed. It showed my sister entering a small law office with Mom. 42 minutes later, they left, carrying a thick manila envelope. That's the day this new will was signed, Eli said, or at least, that's when it was created. My pulse quickened. Where did you get this? He smirked. Let's just say an old friend owed me a favor, and the office's security system isn't exactly Fort Knox. I stared at the frozen image of my mother and sister walking down that sidewalk, smiling like they'd just closed a business deal. This goes to Bennett, I said. Saturday morning, a white envelope slid under my apartment door. No return address. Inside 3 pages, typed. A list of alleged grievances against me, times I'd supposedly borrowed money and never repaid it, family events I'd ruined, ways I'd taken advantage of their kindness. It read like a script designed to make me doubt myself. Instead, it made me more certain than ever. I tucked it into my growing folder of evidence. By Sunday night, I realized something. The fear I'd expected to feel, the fear they were counting on, wasn't there anymore. In its place was something steadier. I thought back to the moment at the memorial when I stood at that podium, envelope in hand, and told a room full of people the truth. I'd been shaking then, but not now. Now, I was ready. Ready for depositions, ready for court, ready for whatever performance my mother and sister thought they could stage next. Because here's the thing about playing the long game. It's not just about patience. It's about knowing you can endure the quiet stretches, the smears, the waiting. And I could. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't reacting to them. I was making the moves. And they had no idea what was coming next. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood polish and something metallic, like a penny pressed into your palm. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, cutting across the marble floor in pale gold stripes. I'd never spent more than a few minutes in a courtroom before, but now I was here early, sitting at the long oak table beside Bennett, my attorney. Across the aisle, my mother and sister sat shoulder to shoulder. Mom's hair was perfect, every strand in place. My sister wore a navy suit that made her look like she'd stepped out of a political campaign ad. Between them sat their attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, with a stack of color-coded folders. They didn't look at me. The clerk called the case. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped. We all rose as the judge entered, black robes billowing slightly with each step. His voice was even, almost gentle as he began, but there was an authority under it that made everyone sit a little straighter. Counsel, you may proceed. Bennett stood, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, this case is about honoring the true wishes of the deceased. We have reason to believe that the will submitted by the respondents is invalid, created under undue influence, and signed when Mr. Hayes was physically incapable of executing a legal document. The opposing attorney rose smoothly. Your Honor, this is nothing more than a baseless attempt to disrupt the distribution of the estate. My clients cared for Mr. Hayes in his final months. They were with him every day. This so-called challenge is a personal vendetta dressed up in legal language. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but I kept my eyes forward. Bennett called our first witness, Dr. Larson, Dad's hospice physician. She was calm, matter of fact. In my medical opinion, she said, Mr. Hayes would not have been able to sign his name unaided during the period in question. His tremors were severe. On bad days, he couldn't hold a spoon without spilling. The judge made a note. Next came Eli. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who wasn't intimidated by courtrooms. Bennett played the security footage on a small monitor facing the judge, the grainy clip of my mother and sister leaving the law office with the manila envelope. Eli testified, that date matches the creation date of the contested will, 6 weeks before Mr. Hayes passed. The opposing attorney tried to rattle him. Mr. Price, are you an expert in legal documents? No, Eli said evenly. I'm an expert in computer forensics and digital evidence, and the metadata on this footage is authentic. It hasn't been altered. A small murmur rippled through the courtroom. Then it was my turn. Bennett guided me through my testimony how I found the original will, the conversations I'd had with Dad about his wishes, the confrontation at the memorial. My voice stayed steady until I described seeing my father's signature forged in shaky, unnatural strokes. That caught in my throat, but I pushed through. The opposing attorney's cross-examination was sharp. Miss Hayes, isn't it true you've had disagreements with your mother and sister for years? Yes, I said, because I don't believe loyalty means silence. She pressed harder. You're doing this for financial gain, aren't you? I met her gaze. I'm doing this because my father trusted me to protect what he built, and I won't let anyone rewrite his final chapter. The judge's eyes flicked between us. Unreadable. After a short recess, my mother took the stand. She was composed, her voice warm but tinged with just enough sadness to play to the room. I only wanted what was best for the family, she said. My husband told me he wished to update his will. We simply followed through. Bennett asked gently, Mrs. Hayes, who were the witnesses to this new will? She hesitated. They worked at the law office. Did your husband know them personally? Silence. Mrs. Hayes? Bennett prompted. No, she admitted finally. My sister's testimony was shorter, but no less rehearsed. She repeated the same lines Dad wanted the will updated. It was his decision. We're just honoring his wishes. But under Bennett's questioning, she admitted she couldn't recall a single conversation where Dad said he wanted me excluded entirely. By late afternoon, the judge called it for the day. We will reconvene next Tuesday for closing arguments, he said. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. As we packed up, Mom and my sister left quickly, their attorney whispering to them in clipped tones. I stayed seated a moment longer, letting the tension drain just enough to breathe. Bennett leaned toward me. They're not as unshakable as they look. You held your ground today. That matters. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a glass of water, the day's events replaying in my mind. My phone buzzed an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject: Thought you should know. Body: I worked at the law office where your mother had that will made. I don't want to get involved, but I can tell you your father wasn't there that day. My heart thudded once. Hard. Attached was a single photo. My mother and sister, standing at the receptionist's desk, alone. No Dad in sight. The timestamp matched the security footage. I forwarded it to Bennett immediately. His reply came within minutes. This could be critical. We'll use it. The following Tuesday, I walked back into the courthouse feeling something I hadn't in weeks calm. I wasn't naive. I knew they'd fight until the last possible second. But I also knew the truth was no longer just my word against theirs. It had weight now, evidence, witnesses, images that told their own story. And when it came time for closing arguments, Bennett stood tall, his voice steady as he laid it all out. The forged signature, the unfamiliar witnesses, the timeline that didn't match my father's declining health. When the opposing attorney spoke, her words felt smaller somehow, wrapped in generalities and appeals to sentiment rather than facts. The judge didn't rule that day. He'd take it under advisement, issue a written decision in the coming weeks. As we left the courtroom, Mom brushed past me without a word. My sister glanced at me once, eyes hard, then looked away. I stepped into the crisp afternoon air, the courthouse doors closing behind me with a soft echo. We weren't at the finish line yet, but for the first time I could see it. And I was still standing. It was a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after the final court session, when the letter arrived. The envelope was heavy, embossed with the county seal. My name was typed neatly in the center, the return address of the probate court in the corner. I set it on the kitchen table. For a long minute, I just stared at it, my coffee growing cold beside me. It wasn't fear anymore, just the weight of knowing this piece of paper held the end of a chapter that had consumed months of my life. I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the pages. The judge's words were measured, careful. He acknowledged the evidence, the shaky signature inconsistent with my father's handwriting, the questionable witnesses, the security footage, and the sworn testimony from Dad's physician. He noted the inconsistencies in my mother and sister's accounts, the absence of any credible explanation for the new will. Then, the line I'd been holding my breath for. The court finds the contested will invalid. The estate will be distributed in accordance with the original will dated the 14th of April of last year. I read it twice, 3 times. My chest rose and fell with a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was over. I called Bennett first. He answered on the second ring. "You got it?" "Yes," I said, my voice a little unsteady. "Well," he said with a rare smile in his tone, "your father's wishes stand. That's what we fought for." "Thank you," I said simply. There wasn't much else to say. Eli came over that afternoon with takeout and a bottle of sparkling cider. We sat on my couch, cartons of lo mein spread across the coffee table. "You did it," he said between bites. "Most people would have backed down a long time ago." I shook my head. I didn't really have a choice. If I let them rewrite Dad's legacy, I'd have to live with that for the rest of my life. "Still," he said, raising his glass, "to standing your ground." We clinked glasses. The news traveled quickly, though not from me. My mother and sister didn't call. They didn't text. They simply went silent. A mutual friend told me they'd been telling people they chose not to appeal for the sake of the family. Let them spin it however they needed to. I wasn't interested in controlling their version anymore. The truth was in black and white, stamped with the court's seal. That was enough. One evening, I drove out to the lake where Dad used to take me fishing. The water was still, the sky streaked in gold and violet. I sat on the weathered dock, my feet dangling just above the surface. I thought about the months I'd spent chasing this, the strain, the courtroom, the whispers in grocery store aisles. I thought about the years before that, every time I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace, every time I'd been told that loyalty meant swallowing the truth. And I thought about Dad, about the way he'd hand me the fishing rod and say, "Don't be afraid to let the line run a little. Sometimes you have to wait for the right moment to reel in." That's what this fight had been. Waiting, watching, and then pulling hard when the time was right. The house, the one Dad built his life around, would be mine and my sister's, just as he intended. I didn't know yet if she'd want to sell, or if she'd avoid me entirely. Either way, I wasn't going to be forced out. But more than property, I'd reclaimed something else. My voice. For years, I'd been the one who let things go, who stayed quiet when wronged. I'd mistaken that for strength, when really it was fear. Fear of losing family, fear of being the villain in their story. Now I knew better. Strength isn't silence. Strength is speaking even when your voice shakes, standing even when you're standing alone. A week later, I boxed up the thick folder of court documents, copies of the wills, and all the evidence Eli and I had collected. I labeled it simply, Dad's Case, 2025. I put it on the top shelf of my closet, not because I thought I'd ever need it again, but because some truths are worth keeping close. Life felt different now, lighter in a way. I could walk into a room without the weight of unspoken grievances dragging behind me. I could answer the phone without bracing for an attack. I wasn't naive. I knew family dynamics don't change overnight. But I also knew that I'd drawn a line, and no one in that family would ever cross it again without finding me standing there. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, maybe you felt a flicker of recognition. Maybe you've been in a room where the truth was unwelcome. Maybe you've been told to let it go when every part of you knew you couldn't. If so, hear me. You are not wrong for protecting your boundaries. You are not wrong for wanting honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Because here's the truth. They don't tell you keeping the peace by swallowing your own truth isn't peace at all. It's just quiet resentment with a pretty face. I folded the court's ruling back into its envelope and set it on the mantel beside Dad's photo. He was smiling in that picture, a little sunburned from the lake, his eyes crinkled the way they did when he was proud. "I did it, Dad," I whispered. The lake outside my window was still. The evening air carried the faintest scent of lilacs from the yard, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. If you want more stories like this, real, unfiltered moments about family, truth, and finding your voice, you might like the space I've built for them. It's called LYLY Stories. I share these not just to tell my own truth, but to remind you that you're not alone in yours. If you've ever needed that reminder, I'd love for you to join me there. Subscribe, stay connected, and maybe, together, we can make sure no one ever feels they have to fight these battles in silence again. Because your story matters, and it deserves to be heard.